Pelé stood over the penalty spot, 107,000 people holding their breath. The referee blew his whistle, and then Pelé did something no one in World Cup history had ever seen. He walked away from the ball. It was June 21st, 1970, the World Cup final. Brazil versus Italy at the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City. The altitude was crushing at 2,400 meters above sea level, turning the pitch into a furnace where every sprint felt like running through wet concrete. This wasn't just a football match. This was Brazil's shot at redemption after the humiliation of 1966, when they'd crashed out of the tournament in the group stage. Pelé had carried that failure like a stone in his chest for 4 years. The brutal fouls, the injuries that made him question his own body, the whispers that maybe at 29 the king was finished. He'd almost quit international football entirely, telling his wife that the world had taken enough from him. But here he was, back on the biggest stage in the world, with everything to prove and nothing left to hide behind. What nobody in that stadium knew was that something had happened in the tunnel 3 hours earlier. Something small, something that seemed insignificant at the time. But it would change the next 90 minutes and the next 50 years of football history. Before the match, as the Brazilian squad walked toward the pitch, the concrete tunnel echoed with the sound of cleats and nervous breathing. A young ball boy named Miguel had been standing near the tunnel entrance, pressed against the wall to avoid getting in anyone's way. He was 12 years old, the son of a stadium groundskeeper who'd worked at the Azteca for 23 years. Miguel had been assigned to work the sideline near the Brazilian bench, the job of a lifetime for a boy who'd grown up kicking deflated balls against his father's toolshed. Miguel had noticed Pelé favoring his right ankle as he walked. A white bandage had come loose, trailing from his sock like a small surrender flag. Without thinking, without asking permission, the boy stepped forward and offered a small roll of medical tape from his pocket. "Señor Pelé," Miguel said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Para su tobillo." Pelé stopped. The rest of the Brazilian team continued walking, their minds already on the match ahead. But Pelé knelt down on the cold concrete and let this nervous 12-year-old help re-tape his ankle. It took maybe 40 seconds. The boy's hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped the tape twice, and his face burned red with embarrassment. "What's your name?" Pelé asked. "Miguel, señor." Pelé smiled, not the smile he gave to cameras, but something smaller and more real. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Thank you, Miguel. You might have just saved the World Cup." It was a kind thing to say. The sort of thing famous people say to make ordinary people feel special for a moment. But Pelé meant it, and he noticed something about Miguel that stayed with him. A faded scar running along the boy's forearm. The kind you get from hard physical work at a young age. The kind that tells you someone knows what it means to struggle. The match began at 12 noon, the sun directly overhead like a burning eye. Brazil played with a fury that seemed almost supernatural. The passing was telepathic. The movement was poetry. Pelé himself scored the opening goal in the 18th minute, a header that seemed to hang in the air for an impossible moment before crashing into the net. The stadium erupted. Brazil was on fire, but Italy fought back. Bonanseña equalized in the 37th minute, and then the game settled into a brutal rhythm of attack and counterattack, both teams refusing to yield. The altitude took its toll. Players cramped. Substitutes watched with hungry eyes. The world held its breath. In the 65th minute, everything changed. A Brazilian attack was building down the right side. Jairzinho had the ball at his feet, dancing past one defender, then another. The ball was crossed into the box, a perfect arc toward Tostão. An Italian defender named Facchetti, desperate to clear, swung his leg wildly and caught Tostão directly on the knee. The sound was audible even above the crowd's roar. The referee's whistle cut through everything. Penalty to Brazil. 107,000 voices fell silent simultaneously, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. This was the moment. A penalty in the World Cup final, with the score level at 1-1, with history hanging in the balance like a coin spinning in the air. Pelé walked toward the spot. His teammates parted for him. He placed the ball carefully on the small white circle, adjusting it twice until it sat exactly right. He took 3 measured steps backward. The Italian goalkeeper, Enrico Albertosi, crouched low, his eyes locked on Pelé's feet, searching for any hint of direction. The referee raised his whistle to his lips, and then Pelé looked up, not at the goal, not at the goalkeeper. He looked past them, toward the far sideline where the Brazilian bench was located. Something was wrong. Near the bench, a cluster of people had gathered in a tight knot. Medical staff in white coats, security guards in blue uniforms, coaches craning their necks. Someone was lying on the ground, and even from 50 meters away, Pelé could see it was small, a child. The referee blew his whistle, signaling Pelé to take the kick. The sound echoed across the silent stadium, but Pelé didn't move. He stood over the ball, staring at the commotion on the sideline as if the penalty, the World Cup, the entire world, had ceased to exist. "Pelé!" the referee called, walking toward him. "Take the penalty!" Pelé ignored him. He stepped away from the ball and began walking, not toward the goal, but away from it, toward the sideline, toward the crowd of people gathered around something small and hurt. The stadium went from silent to confused to chaotic. 107,000 people murmured, whispered, shouted. What was happening? Was he injured? Was this some kind of protest? Had the greatest player in the world lost his mind? Carlos Alberto, Brazil's captain, sprinted after him and grabbed his arm. "Pelé! What the hell are you doing? The penalty!" Pelé pulled free without looking back. He kept walking. When he reached the sideline, he pushed through the medical staff and the security guards with a calm authority that made grown men step aside without argument. And there, lying on the grass with tears streaming down his face and his right arm bent at an angle that made the adults around him look away, was Miguel, the ball boy, the 12-year-old who had taped Pelé's ankle 3 hours earlier. Miguel had been running to retrieve a ball that had gone out of play during the penalty buildup. In his eagerness, he'd tripped on the concrete edge of the pitch and gone down hard. His arm had taken the impact. "Everyone move back," Pelé said quietly. His voice carried an authority that made the team doctor, a man who'd worked in medicine for 30 years, immediately obey. Pelé knelt beside Miguel. The boy was sobbing, not just from the pain shooting through his arm, but from shame. Here he was, injured on the ground, in front of 107,000 people, in front of the greatest footballer who had ever lived, during the most important match in history. He had ruined everything. "Miguel," Pelé said softly, "look at me." The boy looked up through his tears. "Do you remember what I told you in the tunnel?" Miguel nodded weakly, unable to speak. "I told you that you might have just saved the World Cup. Now it's my turn to help you." Pelé stood and turned to the medical team. His voice was calm but left no room for argument. "His arm is broken. Get a stretcher. Move slowly. Be careful with him." The referee had walked over, his face a mixture of confusion and barely contained frustration. "Pelé, we need to resume play. This is the World Cup final. The whole world is watching." Pelé looked at the referee with an expression that made the official take an involuntary step backward. "This boy," Pelé said, "is more important than any football match, more important than any World Cup, more important than any of us." The stadium had gone completely quiet. On the massive screens around the Azteca, the cameras had zoomed in on this scene. The world's greatest footballer kneeling in the grass beside an injured ball boy, while 107,000 people waited and the World Cup final hung frozen in time. Millions more watched on televisions around the world, not understanding what they were seeing, but unable to look away. Miguel was loaded onto a stretcher. As the medical team prepared to carry him away, Pelé leaned close and whispered something in the boy's ear. "Wait for me after the match. I promise I'm coming to find you." Then Pelé did something that would become one of the most iconic images in football history. He reached into his sock and pulled out the small roll of white medical tape, the same tape Miguel had used on his ankle before the match, and pressed it into the boy's good hand. "Hold on to this," Pelé said. "It's lucky. It helped me. Now it'll help you." Miguel clutched the tape against his chest as they carried him away. Pelé walked back to the penalty spot. The ball was still there, waiting on its white circle. The goalkeeper was still crouched, though his concentration had been shattered. The world was still watching. But something had shifted. The Italian players, who had been preparing to defend with desperate energy, stood in silence. The Brazilian team, who had been anxious and tense, now seemed calm. Even the crowd, over 100,000 people from dozens of countries, seemed united in something that transcended the match itself. They had witnessed something that football rarely shows, the reminder that the game is played by human beings, not machines. The referee blew his whistle again. Pelé took 3 steps back. He looked at the goal. He looked at the goalkeeper. And then, just before striking the ball, He glanced toward the tunnel where Miguel had been carried away. The kick was perfect. Low, hard, driven to the left corner with absolute conviction. Albertosi dove the right way, but couldn't reach it. The net rippled. Goal. Brazil 2, Italy 1. Brazil went on to win 4-1 in what many still consider the greatest World Cup final ever played. Pelé scored another goal and assisted on 2 more. The football was transcendent. Jairzinho's power, Rivellino's left foot, Carlos Alberto's legendary 4th goal. The world called it the beautiful game at its most beautiful. But the moment everyone talked about afterward wasn't the goals or the assists or the trophy. It was the penalty that almost wasn't taken. After the match, true to his word, Pelé found Miguel in the stadium's medical room. The boy's arm had been set in a white plaster cast. His father, the groundskeeper, stood in the corner, overwhelmed and embarrassed that his son had caused such a scene during the most important game in the world. Pelé spent 45 minutes with them. He signed the boy's cast with a black marker, writing words that Miguel would never allow anyone to erase. He gave Miguel his match jersey, the same yellow shirt he'd worn while winning the World Cup, and he made a promise. "When your arm heals," Pelé said, "I want you to come to Santos. I want you to train with our youth academy. I see something in you, Miguel. The same thing I saw in myself when I was your age. Courage." Miguel never became a professional footballer. His broken arm healed poorly, leaving him with limited mobility that made a playing career impossible. But Pelé kept his promise. He brought Miguel to Santos, not as a player, but as a youth coordinator. Miguel spent the next 35 years working with young players, teaching them not just football techniques, but the values that Pelé had shown him that day in Mexico City. The small roll of white medical tape that Pelé had given Miguel became one of the most precious artifacts in football history. Miguel kept it in a glass case in his office at Santos until his death in 2019. In his will, he donated it to the Brazilian Football Museum in São Paulo, where it sits today alongside Pelé's World Cup medals, his golden boots, and the jerseys he wore in his greatest matches. The inscription beneath the tape reads, "The moment that proved football is about more than goals." In interviews decades later, Pelé was often asked about that penalty, why he walked away from the most important kick of his life to help an injured ball boy nobody had ever heard of. His answer was always the same. "I looked up and I saw Miguel on the ground, crying, and in that moment I understood something I had forgotten. Football gave me everything: fame, money, glory beyond anything I could have imagined as a poor boy from Tres Corazones. But what is any of that worth if we forget that the people around us are more important than any trophy? That boy helped me when I needed it. I helped him when he needed it. That's what football is supposed to be. That's what life is supposed to be." The 1970 World Cup is remembered as the greatest tournament ever played, with the greatest team ever assembled, led by the greatest player who ever lived. But the legacy of that final isn't just about the beautiful football, or the tactical brilliance, or the historic victory. It's about a 12-year-old ball boy with a broken arm and a roll of white tape, and the moment when the king of football reminded the entire world that compassion is more important than competition. Some things matter more than winning. Pelé knew that, and on June 21, 1970, he taught it to 107,000 people in the Azteca and millions more watching at home. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that greatness isn't just about talent. It's about how you treat people when the whole world is watching. Have you ever seen someone stop everything to help another person in a moment when it really mattered? Tell us in the comments.